Hello and welcome to a panel I'm looking forward to hearing from. It is four really incredible journalists joining us today. Three general managers and executive director. Let me start from the way I'm looking at Michael Leal, KCCU Radio from down in Cameron. Good to see you, Michael.
Thank you for the invite.
My friend Dick Pryor, general manager of KGOU, of which I'm an alum. Mr. Pryor, good to see you, sir.
I'm well aware. Good to see you, Scott.
Rich Fisher, the GM up at KWGS and up in Tulsa. Always good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Glad for the invitation.
And the executive director of KOSU and NPR board member, Rachel Hubbard. Good to see you, Ms. Hubbard.
It's good to see you.
Let's start with what just happened with rescission. It is a lot of money that Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been defunded, as they like to say, if that's correct. But let me start with you, Rachel. Give us a background as to what happened. We'll get into the importance of it later.
Well, this, for those of us who've been living it, has been a little bit of a saga of several months going back to November when we first started to get hints about DOGE. But what ultimately happened almost 2 weeks ago is that Congress, both the House and the Senate, passed a $9.4 billion rescissions package. Of that, $1.1 billion was clawed back from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So this was previously approved funding that mostly went to local public radio stations that are like the ones that you see here on this screen, that are independently owned and operated in local communities across the country. More than 1,000 stations or outlets operating nearly 1,400 signals had their budgets cut. And for most stations, this was an immediate impact. While it doesn't technically go into effect until October, when the federal fiscal year begins, for stations like ours, our budget year began on July 1st. And so it is a budget hit for this fiscal year for most local public radio stations. But what it essentially does is, in the Corporation for Public Broadcasting that has historically funded public radio and television stations since 1967, ends that outlet as we know it.
So let me stay with you before we get to what's happening on the board level, Rachel. And then we'll just go around the room. The impact on your individual stations, what is that at this moment?
Collectively in Oklahoma, it's roughly an $8 million annual impact. So that's what we would call the replacement cost, because it's much more expensive for us to replace the income that we got from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, because we're eliminating that umbrella organization that allowed us to achieve economies of scale for things like satellite services and music rights, among other things.
Michael, down at Cameron, for our Lawton folks, what does it mean for your station?
It's hurting. We're hurting bad. We have 5 stations. We have 2 in Lawton, Altus, Ardmore, Wichita Falls, and Lawton. And that means $108,000 a year for us. It's almost like 50% of what we collect in revenue each year. So it's going to be up to the listeners and our business support to make up that $100,000. But realistically, it's going to be tough. And we're looking at possibly changing a lot of our weekend programs that cost quite a bit of money. Our priority is to keep NPR news. And we are more of a music station. Afterwards, we have classical music. And the weekends have been just a variety of programming that we've just been accustomed to on public radio. So we're just going to take a hard look at some of that weekend programming to kind of save money.
Dick, your station, which are well known in this part of the country, and where I get my blues on the weekend, by the way.
Very good. I'll pass that along.
You know how many, it's just like KOSU, Rachel, how many folks in the media right now in Oklahoma City are from either KGOU or KOSU went through those stations?
Yeah, there are a lot. And there have been for many, many years. The hit for us is about $215,000 in the direct and ancillary costs that CPB absorbed. as Rachel was talking about, the replacement cost for KGOU is about $300,000. And the problem, of course, is, as she said, this hits in our current fiscal year. This is not a delay. What had previously been set up years ago, and CPB has been funded through federal appropriation, through bipartisan negotiations for more than 50 years, uninterrupted. It was set up for a 2-year advance. And so actually what was rescinded was the advance appropriation, which had already been appropriated for fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027, based on the federal fiscal year, which begins in October. But unfortunately, we're already in that current fiscal year 2026. One other thing I might add on the 2-year advance, the reason for that initially was to give stations the ability to plan, to know how much money they were going to have available for the next couple of years, and have plenty of advance notice if that were to change. And the other reason for it was to try to take politics out of it. But politics entered into it this year.
Irony. Word for that, right? Rich, up in Tulsa, your impact.
It's about the same as Dick and Rachel's. It's for us, it's about $155,000 in actual support, but probably close to double that in extra costs we'll have to bear. And I think all of us are saying at this point that this is pretty much an estimate. We really don't know what the actual costs are going to be. This is our best guess at this particular time. The one thing I'd also like to stress is there are several other signals outside of the state that do serve Oklahoma listeners. KRPS in Pittsburgh, Kansas, they get close to 40% of their revenue from CPB funding. High Plains Public Radio, that serves people in the far western reaches of the Tulsa, Oklahoma Panhandle and far northwestern Oklahoma, they receive similar sort of percentages of their funds, their total revenue from CPB funding. So this will have an impact on every single radio station, every single public television station in the country.
And we haven't even really gotten to the public television side of it, but let me go back to Rachel. There are a lot of people that listen to, say, Morning Edition or All Things Considered, or a lot of NPR programming, sometimes on the phone, that don't actually listen to it on terrestrial. And I think it was, Michael, you said what we're trying to do is like make sure we keep NPR programming. Let's start with the programming that comes from NPR and where you think that's headed right now, how the mothership is going to be impacted.
I think that a lot of that is still being evaluated. There is a lot of data that is currently being gathered from local stations to better understand both the fiscal impact that what happened in Congress is having, but also some things that are happening in states around the country that are impacting as costs are being pushed down from the federal government to state level. There are several stations who are receiving, for example, like Florida, they have the FPERN network, which is an emergency alerting network. And that is currently being affected in Florida because of federal costs that are being pushed down to the state level. So NPR is gathering a lot of information right now to best support local stations and understand what the value exchange will be with local stations and NPR going forward, so that we maintain as much of that 99.7% reach of the American population as is possible under this new operation. But this is a very serious challenge to make sure that that programming is still available, because early estimates indicate, not just from NPR, but from other outside studies, indicate that upwards of 80 public radio stations are facing bankruptcy by October.
That's dire. Let me ask you, let me just stay with you, Rachel, and that was on the national level, but let's come back to each individual station. I'll start with Rachel, and then Rich, and then Mike, and then Dick. What's happening with your individual stations, each city, and what are you most concerned about that the public is going to be missing as you gather the data? I know it's early, but you're probably in discussions about, what is the public going to miss?
Well, what we've been trying to do right now and the things that we've been telling our listeners, we went into an emergency fundraiser pretty soon after the rescission vote happened early not last Friday, but the Friday before that morning. And so as we went into that emergency fundraiser, our goal was to stabilize things so that we could get enough information and not have to immediately lay off journalists or immediately have to cut programming, so that we can then build towards the medium and long-term stability in a new operating environment. So we're still very much dealing with the urgent in terms of that emergency fundraiser, dealing with that immediate gap that affects this year to buy us some runway so that we can deal with the medium and long term.
Michael, go ahead.
Well, I can go ahead and go. For KWGS, it's very similar, and I think I'm not sure about Michael's station, but I know that all three of us in KGOU, KOSU, and KWGS have been in emergency fundraisers last week, and I think I'm sure they will have similar stories. But we have heard from so many listeners who have just really come through in a major way at this particular point. I mean, lots of major growth in their giving to the station, and it has been very gratifying, but I'm really afraid it's just a short-term fix. We are certainly grateful for those listeners, and it also gives us a little bit of runway to literally figure out what's going to have to change in the wake of this permanent loss of federal funding. I think for us, it's about looking at how can we make the programs that we purchase as well as the programs we produce go further. And so that means some hard decisions. We've already made a few hard decisions. A couple of decisions have made on behalf of us. Wisconsin Public Radio, which we get programming from, and I know Dick does as well, they've announced they're stopping all national programming because they're looking at major cuts. So we're having to fill hours that we've used with programming originating from Wisconsin Public Radio. We've also looked at how we can make we also have a full-time classical music station. So we're looking at some of the symphony broadcasts that we use, make it go further with additional airings so that we can maybe cut down some money there. But it really is something that we're going to be looking at hard over the next 6 months, I think, in our case.
And ours too. We're taking the same approach. The first question I'm typically asked by people is, what are you going to cut? And my response is, well, I'm looking at what are we going to gain? And that is, I'm looking first and foremost at the revenue side before any talk of reduction in forces or reduction in service or anything like that, because we have to know where we are financially and how much money we're able to gain to chip away at that hole that is now in our budget before we start making any additional moves that we might regret later should we raise enough money to be able to cover this, at least in the short term. But as you're mentioning, Rich, I think the real concern for us is that at some point we're not going to have the amount of money that we need. We will have to make some additional trims here or there. We all run very lean operations. There's not a lot of items to cut or to trim. We'll move things around. We'll make some decisions. Some of the programs that we have right now will go away of necessity. Some, as Rich mentioned, like Zorba Pastor, are going away anyway. So what we'll have to do is raise as much money as we can, as fast as we can, take stock and see where we are, and then we'll have to move to the expense side and see what we have to do at that point. And I think the real danger is that people will rally now, but they will not remember that this is the new normal for every year. With a loss of all of this money, it's not for just this year, it's next year, and we don't expect this money to come back.
And we've had a fragile budget for many years. And so this puts a bigger hole in our budget. And so we don't have a surplus of funds. And so when, for example, this weekend, I had an air conditioning go out on the transmitter in Altus. So, you're looking at $1,000 there, and $1,000 is a big hit for us, being a small station as we are. We're going to have to take a look at staff. We have one person retiring in September. We don't know if we're going to be able to fulfill that position again for a while. We have another person retiring in the spring. So, taking a hard look, we have a staff of only 5 people. So, when we lose 1 or 2, that's a big percentage of your entire staff. So that's why we're taking a look at some of the weekend programs and to see what we can, manage there. But we do have our priorities, and our priority is that service, that those programs that we want to keep, especially like NPR News, Morning Edition, all things considered.
And I think, Scott, that's the thing that you'll see over time. In terms of things that people will see immediately, those may not be super obvious. But in terms of national programming, 30%, well, this is an extremely complicated formula, but a portion of money, 30% of some other percentage was dedicated toward national programming production. And so that may not have been programming that was produced at NPR. It may have been programming produced at a local station like Wisconsin Public Radio that was then available for purchase by other stations in the system. So as that gets squeezed and there are fewer and fewer programs available, or stations are re-airing shows to make their budgets go further, then there will be fewer and fewer offerings at the national level for what local stations can pick up, because there are fewer people that are carrying a higher burden of the cost. So then it starts to snowball in on itself. And I think that that's something that you may see over the medium and long term in terms of programs and shows that people really love that just cannot exist from a profit and loss standpoint.
And Scott, I might add in, you're going to see a lot of independent producers are going to get a really squeezed, because oftentimes even a small CPB grant for the production of their documentary or maybe limited series makes a tremendous difference in their ability to tell their story. And these are not, I think right now there's a lot of animus towards NPR and PBS, but our system is a far more loose confederation than a network. And there are a lot of independent producers creating amazing work and telling amazing stories. And those producers are really going to be squeezed by the loss of federal funding.
I think something else that is top of mind for most of us is music licensing. It might be easy to say, well, if you lose some of those programs, you can just play music. Well, you can't if you don't have a license to play it. And CPB negotiated, managed, and paid for music licensing for stations. That was part of the service that they provided. And so where that goes, we don't yet know. And that's another expense that potentially stations will have to pick up that they were not planning for.
And that touches so many things. I mean, you may think that it's just the playing of music, but it also affects streaming rights or fair use of music that is in a story that you post online. So if this goes down the path, then it may be that we have to pull stories off of our website, that we're not able to air stories that have fair use music, or use music beds, or air local, music, things like that. Music rights touch far more than I think any of us even realized prior to entering into these discussions.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things we've been educating our classical music audience about is they see this as, okay, this affects NPR. This doesn't affect me. It affects the classical music station even greater, because that rights agreement and the streaming rights, and so many members of that use our product are listening on Alexas, they're listening on their phone, they're listening on any sort of smart device. And all of that is affected by the loss of federal funding.
And ironically, we reminded members of Congress of this every opportunity that we had. And a lot of them that voted in favor of rescinding this funding did so in order to get back at NPR or PBS or both. But the reality is they get a small percentage of their funding from CPB. It's the stations like ours all over the country that are the ones that are actually being hurt the most. The local stations that provide local programs that are in your communities where you can't get this information from anybody else, especially if you're in a rural area that's a news desert. And so by cutting this funding, those very constituents of a lot of members of Congress are going to be the people hurt the most in their communities.
Yeah, there was a great irony on the day that the Senate passed the resolution, was that out in the Aleutian Islands there was a tsunami warning, and all of Alaskan Civil Defense said, tune into the NPR station in Unalaska, which were, they were in a concrete building that could have been inundated if the tsunami had actually happened. And they were providing civil defense information and important emergency information to everybody along the chain of the islands. And, there was no other commercial broadcaster. There was no other person providing that. It was simply a public radio station as part of the Alaska Public Radio Network, which was the provider of information in a crisis. And that's happened so many times.
And we do that here in Oklahoma.
Sure.
We're an integral part of the emergency alert system in Oklahoma because we have such a strong system of getting information out, and other stations around the state monitor us in the event of emergencies. So in addition to the news, information, the music, all of that, the emergency alerting is so very important. And I have seen it said that, well, the emergency alerting won't be affected by this. I don't know where that's coming from, because it will be.
Let me
There are
ask
two
about the
systems, and I think a lot of people think, and we've heard this around emergency alerting, and we've heard it around programming access, is that people have just infinite access through their phone. And we have witnessed numerous natural disasters over the last 12 months that have affected people's access to their phones. And we know that this is a really important redundancy. And in some cases, it's not a redundancy. In some cases, there are some public safety agencies or weather agencies, alerting agencies that use the phone. It's called the Integrated Public Alert Warning System. They put all of their alerts into that, which is also known as iPause. And others put some into iPause and some still through radio. It is still a very inconsistent application. And we know that we do have internet and cell phone deserts in Oklahoma. And in addition to that, we have a lot of people in the state on fixed incomes. We have talked to multiple people over the last several days who still buy minutes on a phone. They don't have unlimited access. They don't have streaming subscriptions to various services. They don't even really have functional access to the internet on their phone because they are buying minutes on their phone the way that perhaps most of the general public did in the late 90s and early 2000s. But that is still a reality for many of our neighbors. And they say that public media is a lifeline for them.
And it's not just the alerting, it's what happens afterwards. I was in New York during Hurricane Sandy, and we were out of electricity for 2 weeks and no cell service. And so we picked up, portable radio, and that's how we received information, what was going on and what was, happening, what can we expect, where do we go for food and water and things like that. And so we can take the same concept here in Oklahoma with tornadoes. If it devastates a community, they don't have the electricity and cell service, they're going to be expecting to hear information on the radio in most cases.
And in fact, there was a poll, Harris Polling, conducted a couple of weeks before the rescission vote. It was released on July 15th. and it found that 73% of Americans agree that they rely on public radio emergency alerts and news for their public safety.
Right.
That was 77% of Republicans and 77% of Democrats. Shall I go on? It also said,
Continue. Yeah.
it also said that, do you trust news and information from public radio? 69% of Americans said yes. 62% of Republicans and 81% of Democrats. And 66% agreed that they support federal funding for public radio. And 66% also believe that public radio is a good value for taxpayer dollars. That came out 3 days before the Senate voted to rescind the funding.
Let me ask about students. I was saying earlier, there's a ton of great journalists have come through KOSU and KGOU, the two big journalism schools there. And Michael and Rich, your universities as well. What's happening to all the student involvement? I don't know. I just asked a question, then a comment. I'm not supposed to be doing that anymore, but I don't know what I would be doing if I hadn't had my couple of years at KGOU. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. I might be doing something else, and maybe that's welcome news in some scores. But the fact is that the very best training I ever had was under Tim Granahan at KGOU. I learned how to do news. He probably thinks that I should have done something else too. But Rachel and Dick and Michael and Rich, go ahead and just discuss about the impact on the young people that are learning how to be journalists and tell stories at university. Michael, you just start and go around the room.
Well, I'm also a graduate from OU and spent some time at KGOU back in 1985. So it was good, like you said, it was good training. We used to have a lot more students working here. It was a requirement from the communication department to work here at KCCU. But right now we just have internships available for the students. So we have anywhere from 1 to 2 students at any time working here. All of them pretty much are journalists. And, so it's a valuable asset, that's for sure. I remember when I first got out of college and working my first, radio news job, you had to be perfect and great every single day. And in college, you don't get that, only if you participate at radio stations like this, where you're doing your craft every single day. It's just great experience. And we want to continue with that in the future for sure.
And I can't say at this point exactly how students might be affected. We teach a practicum class. We also teach an independent study class. And then we have 3 or 4 students that are paid employees, some of whom then go on to other jobs in other fields, and others stay in journalism. Rachel's hired some, that have been trained at various stations. And so it's the training of those focused career journalists, those that want to make journalism a career, and those early career journalists that we hire. A lot of the people that we hire are early career journalists, and they receive valuable training here and then can go on with their careers. Those are the ones that I'm concerned about most. If we can't afford to pay students and put students in positions to learn, that really takes a lot off of our mission, which is not only to inform the public and to be a public servant, but also to help train those journalists.
Yeah, for us, we don't have a journalism school per se. We have a digital studies program, but we have interns around the year. Some are making journalism their career. Others are getting into it and saying, okay, this is something I probably don't want to pursue. But I will tell you, we give them excellent training, and oftentimes we're starting really at the basics, and we're pushing them through. And many of them are we've had interns last summer that had pieces on NPR, we just finished up an internship with a digital media journalist, mixed media journalist, and we hope that we'll be able to have them For us, it's a nominal cost, and it's something we consider pretty much a given for the station as long as it's affiliated with the university. But the future at this point is somewhat unknown.
For us, we have students that are using our Stillwater studios for production, podcast production, internships, those sorts of things. We also have a number of interns. We're very fortunate that we do have an endowment for our internships through, it's called the Casey Allen Gosnell Internship Fund. So that fund helps us, even with the loss of federal funding, to continue to host interns. But Dick mentioned a really important point that I think the more critical risk is with early career development and young journalists. One of the focuses of, I think, all of us here has been to the market failure currently is around journalism. And that was really what the Public Broadcasting Act in 1967 was meant to address, was the market failure at that point of children's television, and that people were just producing, quote, brain rot television. So we wanted to produce educational programming. The market failure currently is that Oklahoma has lost 75% of its journalism capacity since 2005. Which means that we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of knowledge around the craft of journalism. And so it is a critical importance to many Oklahomans to develop those early career journalism skills and to have people in that pipeline that can continue to tell the story of Oklahoma long into the future. That is one of the most critical risks that we face. And I don't know of many journalism outlets these days that have been adding journalists. But as I look around this room, people in this room have been adding journalists, where nearly every other outlet that we look at in Oklahoma has been cutting them because of that market failure.
And everybody knows that local content, especially the news, is very, very expensive.
That it is. I can tell you that. All right. A couple more questions and I'm really grateful to all of you who are got your hands full right now. Here's what I think about NPR. It just stands out in my mind. First off, I started listening to classical music probably because of KWGS going up and down the turnpike. Okay. And I started listening to Adventures in Good Music with Carl Haas. Yeah. Y'all know Carl Haas? Hello, everyone. It's just the greatest deal. And then one of the greatest sportcasters of all time, Red Smith, who would do Morning Edition. So, by the way, because people know I'm a Packers nut shareholder, Red Smith went to Green Bay East High School, by the way, Dick. And, I learned how to tell stories from listening to these people. Journalism storytelling, right? Really good storytelling. And I'm wondering, you take those names from the past and just start with Rachel and Rich and Michael and Dick, the endangering of journalism, the endangering of storytelling. I hate to dwell on the negative. What is your greatest fear right now? I mean, you've said that people might respond to the short-term emergency, but we watch this stuff with Paramount. We watch this stuff with the Washington Post. You know what's going on. And so it does appear to be dire times. So while we're, that old saying, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like to play?
Well, I think you make a great point, because journalism is under fire in general and has been for quite some time in general. So we're fighting that fight. Universities are under fire, and we're all university licensed stations. We're dealing with that fight. And then now we have the CPB funding. We're dealing with that fight. And the other part of this that people might not realize is that we're a nonprofit. We go out and raise money. We ask people to give money so that they can hear programs that are free. And there is a cycle to that. So when the economy takes a hit, when prices go up, when your audience is older and they may not have the disposable income that they once had, and you look at businesses that we hope to have as underwriters or business sponsors that may have to be cutting also because of the current economy, whatever it may be, We have the economic factors that we also have to deal with right now, and whether people have the money available to contribute when we need it the most. There's a lot going on.
I think my concern is a little bit more existential. There was a study that was done by Allison Shortle of OU and Rosemary Evans of Oklahoma State that the Oklahoma Media Center performed about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And as they were out in communities that have lost their local newspapers, they initially asked people, you know, what do you feel like? How do you get your news? What do you feel like is missing? And initially people were like, well, I don't think that I'm missing anything. I think I'm pretty well informed. And then when they started to dig a little deeper about what they knew about what was happening at their city council, at their county commission, or how connected they felt to their neighbors, it uncovered a layer that people really did feel disconnected and they didn't know what was going on. And that was because of the decimation of primarily locally based newspapers. And so my fear is that this doesn't go away with a big bang. This just slowly, death by 1,000 cuts, goes away because we try to conserve here and we cut a program, and we try to conserve there and we lay off a person, and we stop funding, as Rich mentioned earlier, independent productions. And so those great documentaries become fewer and fewer. And so it just dies with a whisper. And I think that that's one of the most nefarious things that we face here, is that then people don't really understand what they're missing because it didn't go away in a big bang, as I think that many people are expecting might happen here, because we're resilient and we're pretty creative and we can try to fill some of those gaps, but then people really don't get the big picture of what goes away.
Yeah, I would also follow up with, this is not the only effort directed at public broadcasting. The FCC is also, they're looking at, well, should non-commercial broadcasters have tax exempt status? They've pondered this openly at the FCC. They're looking at whether underwriting should be taxed, which is our ability for businesses in our community to sponsor programs. And I think there's a lot of different little, I think, use Rachel's terminology, a death by 1,000 cuts. And I tell you, during this whole debate, one of the things that really got to me a lot was I heard several members of various congressional delegations, including here in Oklahoma, saying, well, we just want to level the playing field between commercial broadcasters and non-commercial broadcasters. They're getting support from the federal government. They should stand on their own 2 feet. Well, the very nature of our license, we are a non-commercial radio station. That means we can't sell advertising, nor do we want to. We really want to be, our public service mission is devoted towards our communities. But the very idea that we could have an equal playing field, the Federal Communications Act, the Public Broadcasting Act completely dismisses that notion. And I don't hear anybody talking about amending those laws.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions that I've received over the last several days has been, well, okay, so you lose federal funding, so now you just sell advertising. And we cannot, by the nature of our license. And a lot of people are confused by that because we do sell business sponsorships, but the FCC heavily governs what we can and cannot say. And if we violate those rules, it is a very hefty fine. So for example, we can't use pricing information. We can't use a lot of qualitative language. So things like best or tastiest or, all of those sorts of things that you
come on down.
Yeah. Can't use calls to action. And for many people, that just means that the businesses that sponsor public media are really behind the public service mission. They're sponsoring that. It's not an advertisement meant to induce business.
Well, we can't sell political advertising. We have to be apolitical. The irony to me here is that there were members of our own congressional delegation that knew otherwise, that were saying that we could just sell more commercials and get through this, just as you're saying. even though they have to know that we're licensed non-commercial and can't do that. And if they don't, they should. And then on the other hand, you have the chairman of the FCC, Brendan Carr, saying that he's wants to investigate stations whose underwriting announcements may sound too commercial. So on the one hand, they're saying, well, you can get through this by selling more commercials, but if you sound like you're more commercial, we're going to investigate you and potentially fine you and put a license. Messaging is interesting throughout all of this. We've all heard that this is a way to begin to balance the budget. We just have to make some tough decisions, and this is one of those tough decisions. The federal deficit is an annual thing. The federal debt is what is accumulated over time. So if you're trying to cut back on spending in order to bring the federal debt or deficit into balance, you might want to look at it this way. The federal debt right now stands at $36.6 trillion. The $1.1 billion that was taken back that had already been appropriated in a bipartisan manner amounts to $1.1 billion over 2 years. That $1.1 billion that was taken back by Congress amounts to 3/100,000ths of 1% of the national debt. It'll take a long time at that rate to balance it.
It's interesting. Former Senator Bellman was involved with started a group, Committee for a Fair and Responsible Budget. I can't think of the acronym, all the way back to Henry Bellman. And they've been into town. I've had them on weekend programming. They talk about the debt, and nobody cares. It's an incredible thing that they're being told by delegations all over the country, not just ours, that when people go home on the weekends and they talk to the public has lots of concerns, but that debt is not one of the issues that comes up. That's why that actually CFB has been hitting the road to try to tell folks about what percentage of GDP this debt is. So sooner or later, people will start to take interest. I think it's time because we're going to lose Rachel at the top of the hour, and I don't want to do that without me first to say thank you to all four of you. It's incredibly difficult. Thanks to Dick for putting it together. I wanted to do this some time ago, but these are four important people with some really tough decisions to make. And the best to all four of you as you work these decisions. But let me start with Michael. Let's just do closing comments. I'll get out of the picture. Michael, Dick, Rich, and end with you, Rachel. Some final thoughts, and maybe for folks who enjoy this, and some of this is going to start hitting home pretty soon. Whenever Lawrence Welk leaves Saturday night, my mother, who's a pretty big Trump fan, she ain't going to like this. So if if he's gone, and my mother may be gone from the Trump camp. Anyway, the whole point. So let's start, Michael. If you begin with final thoughts and a comment about, for public who is watching this, what they might do.
Donate. We sent out letters to listeners who have not contributed in the last 6 years, and we're receiving, funds back from them. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear that. And we just need to keep that momentum going, not only now, but in the future, especially if CPB doesn't recover. And then just community support, foundation support, and so on. We got to close that gap. And we're going to continue to be very positive about our mission. We all love public radio. We know why we're working here, and we're just going to move onward.
I would say we're looking at raising money from various sources, and it's not just through private giving or business sponsorships. That may not put us over the top. So we have to look at various kinds of revenue generation in addition to eventually some expense reduction. But we appreciate our loyal listeners. I know we all do. Our loyal listeners who have given for years, many of whom have given large amounts of money over the years, and we appreciate them so much. And yet here we are needing for them to consider increasing their gifts. And for all of those people that have not been giving at all, trying to make sure that they realize that when we're talking about fundraising and could you contribute today, we're talking to them. And this is free You don't have us behind a paywall, but it's not free to us. So it does cost money. And so we're just encouraging everyone. Thank you so much for giving, and get ready to pony up some more for us if you can, and pony up money for us for the very first time if you never have, because it's going to take all of us together to fight this fight and keep this service continuing into the future as we know it.
Well, I would echo what Michael and Dick just said, but I have to say, I'm oddly optimistic, and I'm not being a Pollyanna here. There are some stations that are in some desperate straits. Michael's station, and I don't want to assume anything, but your small rural stations are in desperate straits.
You're right.
Stations as close as KUAF in Fayetteville, they're looking at a double whammy. They've lost all their state funds as well as federal funds. And so I don't want to sugarcoat that. But what I've been heartened by is the fact that, first of all, I think we are dedicated to continuing this service, whatever we have to do to make sure that this continues. And I'm also heartened by the fact that as we have all been reeling in our own ways, we're looking to the people that are most vulnerable, and we're looking for solutions that will help keep them on the air as well. I'm very heartened by that approach. And I know that I'm hearing from a lot of listeners and a lot of foundations and a lot of different resources that we're going to have to make asks. But I really believe this system is devoted to moving forward as a system, not every man for himself. And I think it really heartens me as we go through this process.
I think I would say a couple of things to you. One is this is not over. We still face a number of challenges. Some of them have been mentioned here on this call. So I would encourage you to stay in tune, because I think so many people were surprised by what happened. They felt like that this was very swift when in reality this was developing over a number of months. So there is an executive order that was issued the first part of May that is still being litigated, and we don't know the impact on local stations around that executive order. Second thing is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It may impact some late release of funds that they could issue that could help local stations in this bridge period. There is DOJ activity, there's stuff from the Federal Communications Commission. There's a lot of activity still happening in the background, so stay in tune. The other thing that you can do to help with this current moment is if you have been impacted by your local public broadcaster, whether it's one of the stations on this call or another station, let them know. Let them know specifically how it has impacted you and your family. That really helps us to communicate the message of value to potential funders. So that's one thing that you can do that doesn't cost you a dime. But the other thing is that if you believe in journalism and you believe in us having more connected communities, if you believe in freedom of information, if you believe in holding officials accountable, we need your support in a way that we have never needed it before. So I ask that you would consider making a donation to your local station, or if it is a station in another state that you grew up in the Four Corners region in Colorado, and you really believe that that is a place that deserves connected information, we've received a couple of those donations over the last couple of days. So give where you live or where you have lived, and that makes a really big difference to the stations.
Now you know why I wanted her to close. I want to go back.
Closer.
Yeah, that's the closer right there. So we're talking, I believe, about basically $9 billion was the rescission. Is that right, Dick?
That included
19.
USAID. It was
Okay.
1.1 billion for CPB, and the rest of it was for USAID projects. Yes.
All right. So some context and perspective. The interest payment on the national debt, $882 billion last year. And some context. That's more than the United States military budget. and this is the money, without comment or trying to draw an implication. That's the sort of money that we're talking about here. I'll just let that one sink in. As the folks at the Committee for a Fair and Responsible Federal Budget say, it ain't sinking.
Well, and let me say one other thing, Rachel got to ways that people can be involved beyond just writing a check. And I think it's very important for everyone out there, especially those people that rely on public media, as so many of you do, to ask questions. Ask us questions. Let us know if you have questions. Seek good information. There's a lot of misinformation floating around out there that has formed opinions of people who think that we're going to be here forever and it's not all that hard and we'll figure out how to do it, and all the reasons that were given for eliminating the funding. Many of those were not founded in reality or truth. So ask questions, be informed, and that will help us as well. And then share that information with your friends and neighbors and encourage them to donate too.
Another great close. I want to thank Michael Leal from KCCU Radio down in Lawton,
Thank you.
Dick Pryor, my friend in Norman, Oklahoma, KGOU, Rachel Hubbard, the executive director at KOSU, SEC and Big 12, respectively, and Rich Fisher, Public Radio Tulsa, where I first began to listen to Carl Haas. And listen, the music aspect of it, I think people have not been talking about that. And that's, for our culture and enrichment of our lives. Holy moly, I hate to see anything happen to that. Anyway, long story short, Rachel said she's out of here at the top of the hour. I'm getting out 30 seconds early. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.